Revolutionary greetings, family. As you know, the South African calendar prescribes that we celebrate our freedom today. This day is marked by the famous event that saw marginalized black masses having a say in who should govern them. Very long queues were seen all over South Africa of first-time voters on the 27th of April 1994. Finally, their suppressed voices would be heard, their stolen land would be retrieved, and at last they would be economically emancipated after all the years of hardcore oppression. At least this is what they hoped for. This is what they thought. A very demanding question has to be posed, however. An undeniable inquiry must be instigated. Are we really free? Did 1994 truly mark our long-awaited liberation? Let's resume our inquiry by conducting a brief post-mortem that examines the state of our country and its continental context, Africa. The colonial era left Africa and her descendants socially, psychologically, and economically bankrupt. It trampled on the integrity of black lives and exploited them of their resources and their wealth. Post-colonialism, the imperialistic agenda continues to economically ostracize and psychologically subjugate black lives. The truth of the matter, family, is that colonialism never loosened its grip on Africa. It just renewed and modernized its chains. These sophisticated chains now go by the name neo-colonialism. Kwame Nkrumah once said, "The essence of neocolonialism is that the state which is subject to it is in theory independent and has all the outward trappings of international sovereignty. In reality, its economic system and thus its political policy is directed from outside." This plainly tells us then, family, that what we deem as free, independent African states is in fact an illusion, symbolism without substance, in the words of Louis Farrakhan. Ever since the Berlin Conference in 1884, where Africa was scrambled on the table by European countries that claimed their own share of Africa, Africa has since never recovered. To date, 136 years later, the colonizer has not allowed any African state to reach its full potential. To this day, there are mines all over Africa overseen by European companies and governments. The proceeds of these mines do not return to the ordinary people of Africa. Africa, the richest land area in the world, home to the masters of civilization, is tragically also the most underdeveloped in the world. What a depressing irony. In Azania, the southern part of Mother Africa, this criminal agenda of oppressing and exploiting black lives was cemented by an evil system called apartheid. A very carefully thought out, cunning and conniving system that was not only sustained by violence but also psychological warfare was put into operation to terrorize our people. Post-1994, our acclaimed year of liberation, imperialism and apartheid still haunt the poor masses of South African black people. Inferiority complexity is an example of the shadows that revisit and torment our people, suffocating their identity, their self-pride, their dreams, and their aspirations. The education we receive reinforces this suffocation. Our education system insists on the generalization of the Western way of life, making it even more painful to be African in Africa. Our education assumes that the only way of life is the Westerner's way. It forces us to detest our indigenous systems and cultures. The more educated we get, ironically, seems to be the less African we become. Carter Woodson once said, and I quote, "The thought of the inferiority of the black man is drilled into him in almost every class he enters and almost every book he studies." How true is this? Our textbooks promote the views and insights of white supremacists and say very little about the vast knowledge of Africans' history and their brain power. Our education system, in more ways than one, furthers incarceration and a sense of servitude. It is clear, therefore, family, that the imperialistic agenda continues to thrive in Azania like it does in all other African states. Neocolonialism has numbed our will to fight by giving us black faces in government, but not the power. Our political leaders are like puppets in the hands of white supremacists who dictate the direction of our state. This deceit is perpetuated by terminologies such as democracy and the rainbow nation, an utter scam that masquerades inequality and inequity. Family, research by the World Bank has proved that South Africa is the most unequal of 149 countries that they surveyed. It is one of the most unequal countries in the world. Inequality in South Africa is very high, persistent, and on the increase in the last 26 years. Poverty remains concentrated in previously disadvantaged areas. The majority of land in South Africa still belongs to white minorities. White supremacists still own land, they still own mines, they still own banks, they own factories, shopping centers, industries, farms, and many private companies. University and school management is dominated by the liberal Eurocentric views of the oppressors. The question persists, therefore, are we really free? It is apparent with the partial evidence brought forward to this inquiry that Azania is not free. I recommend that we continue to war on. Let's look past the things that divide us and let us unite for maximum impact. Tribalism and xenophobia are nothing but divisive, destructive mechanisms to stall our freedom. Let's wake up and realize our true enemy. In this era, our freedom will not come by throwing stones in the streets, but by organizing ourselves and using our minds. Family, I would like to make it very clear that there will be no revolution, whether economical, political, intellectual, or social, until there is psychological revolution. Steve Biko's lasting words of wisdom are relevant now more than ever. The most potent weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. We remain slaves if our minds are in shackles. None other than ourselves can free ourselves, said Bob Marley. We must free our minds by not being naive and believing everything we hear and see. Propaganda is the remote control in the hands of the enemy. If we continue to allow ourselves to be controlled by mass media, we do it to our own peril. We need to see things for what they are and distance ourselves from further psychological bondage. Let's redeem the essence of Black consciousness and fall in love with ourselves once more. Whiteness is not the standard of beauty and intelligence, and we should stop treating it as such. Let's counter the colonial education that we receive with self-education of African content that teaches us about our true selves and sparks our brilliance. Education that sets us up for psychological reformation. Family, let's not be lazy to think and to strategize. We are inherent geniuses, masters of civilization. The enemy works day and night to suppress us. We must work twice as hard to rise up against the odds. Let's take charge of our lives and destinies. Arise, black child, for it is not yet Uhuru.